cancer like a war. Patients have become the battlefield. Bodies are cut, burned, and poisoned, and they call it care. Pain is renamed as progress, and faith in medicine is replaced by faith in money. But a rebellion is rising. Across the nation, people are reclaiming what was stolen: hope, truth, and the right to heal without fear. Because healing was never meant to destroy. It was meant to restore. Welcome to GoldCare Townhall, the Cancer Rebellion. Rewriting the rules of recovery. For too long, the medical industrial complex has dictated what healing should look like: profit over people, silence over truth. Now, the pioneers of a new era are standing together to expose it. Dr. Austin Lake, functional medicine pioneer, reconnects care to the body's design and restores purpose to healing. Dr. Paul Marik, physician, researcher, and author, challenging convention and reshaping how medicine understands and treats cancer. Dr. Simone Gold, physician, attorney, and founder of GoldCare, calls the system to account and calls truth back to medicine. They are redefining recovery through alignment, not aggression. Faith over fear, design over destruction, truth over tyranny. This is more than medicine. It's redemption through revelation. And it begins now. GoldCare, built for you, powered by freedom, trusted by thousands.
Welcome to GoldCare Medical Town Hall. I'm Drew Couture. Thank you so much for being here. Joining us tonight is Dr. Austin Lake, founder of the Holy Health Program. He is a dedicated healthcare professional passionate about helping people take control of their health. With a strong background in functional medicine and commitment to natural, holistic healing, he empowers patients to restore balance and lasting well-being. Also with us is Dr. Paul Marik. His book, Cancer Care: The Role of Repurposed Drugs and Metabolic Interventions in Treating Cancer, reflects a career dedicated to questioning outdated theories and advancing a metabolic understanding of disease through practical, evidence-based, and clinically grounded medicine. Also with us, our moderator tonight is Dr. Simone Gold, founder and CEO of GoldCare Health and Wellness. For decades, cancer meant attack, harsh treatments, invasive surgeries, and broken bodies. But what if true healing comes from working with the body, not against it? Across America, patients are rediscovering a powerful truth: the body was made to heal itself. You'll learn tonight about the truth behind treatments that promise a cure but trap patients in endless cycles, how fear became a business, and the power of seeing beyond the system. And lastly, choices that restore control and open the way to real healing. I'm also very excited to announce that we've got another surprise for you. When you join GoldCare, we know you're experiencing a new way of medical care. It can be confusing and completely different than you're used to, and that's okay. Join GoldCare today and meet with our nursing team for free. That's right. It's on us. Your first appointment with our nursing team to understand what GoldCare is and the types of care available to you. Our nurses are thrilled to meet with you, and they're available to answer your questions. It's the ultimate matchmaking experience. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Simone Gold.
Thank you so much, Drew, and thank you to our guests. I will turn it over to Dr. Lake in just a moment. We're just going to start with kind of an overview. You know, everyone here on this podcast, on this town hall rather, most of you do know who I am, and you know that I started to become known during the COVID era because the amount of disinformation and propaganda that was being put forth by the government, public health officials, and the media was only exceeded by the propaganda, I should say disinformation that was coming from the medical establishment. And as a physician, it was extremely disheartening. I grew up, many of you know, the daughter of a doctor, and I absolutely thought being a doctor was the best thing a person could do with their life. I really didn't think, and my parents raised me to think it was the single most noble profession a person could pursue. So it has been very, very challenging to believe and notice and observe that doctors did not do the right thing by their patients. Prior to COVID, I just thought the industry was, difficult and unwieldy and expensive and inefficient, and you had to kind of work around it. But I'd never experienced massive amounts of doctors and nursing staff just not put the patient first. And I think that just really opened my eyes to the fact that our medical system is absolutely unfixable the way it is. That doesn't mean that you can't use the medical system when you need to, but it does mean you have to be a much wiser consumer, and you need to learn how to navigate it. And you need to seek out those voices that can give you good advice, unbiased advice. So that's kind of the top overview of how GoldCare works, is to give you doctors who are independent, to give you doctors who know the medical, like myself, but also doctors that are very familiar with the naturopathic world. We have naturopathic and medical doctors. And it all comes from the fact that medicine, in the outside world is really just kind of an industry driven by profit, which sometimes heals the patient, but I would say it is not the organizing principle. The organizing principle around patients and doctors, the doctor-patient relationship, ought to be only what's in the patient's best interest. That should be how the whole system is organized, and it's not. So when you look at something like cancer, there's an entire industry built up to manage it in a certain way. And the question is that the right way to be handling it? And I think after I learned from Dr. Marik that we've spent, I think you had said $500 billion, if I got that number, $500 billion over the last number of decades. And where are we in the cancer treatment? But before we get to Dr. Marik, who's really become quite the leader in this field, I want to start with Dr. Lake, actually, because actually, no, let me reverse. I keep coming back, but both of you are so different. So Dr. Lake, you come from kind of a naturopathic background, and Dr. Marik comes from a medical background, which is why we do these things. We want to hear from both sides. And I guess I'd like to hear from you first. What are your thoughts about just the whole kind of industry, the medical system, how it's kind of oriented, and my perspective that it's oriented towards illness and it's not really oriented towards wellness, it's oriented towards illness.
Was that to me, directing that to me?
Dr. Lake.
Yeah. No, I think, for all intents and purposes, I think most healthcare providers have, like you were saying, really good intentions. They get into the industry for the right reasons. They want to help people heal. As you get into the industry, you start to find that it's very much an industrialized complex that is a big money-making business. I mean, cancer is now a $210 billion a year industry. And, a lot of these outcomes we're focused on are focused on simply like tumor regression or, having a shrinkage of a tumor. When if you look at the longevity of somebody that has to go through the cut it, burn it, and poison it mentality of what we do for cancer treatment, you start to find that they're left with bodies that are very dysfunctional and have a hard time just getting through their life. And so, obviously prevention is always the best model if you can do it. And that's why I really am here doing what I do, because my brother had cancer when he was 14. I was 12 years old. It really made a huge impact on me. And, he survived. Like, it was, glory be to God. And thanks to his provider, his doctor that helped to do that. But if the doctor knew that maybe there were some supportive measures, or there was some support from the insurance companies, or there was some more support for the patient that they could provide to ensure that the harm is as minimal as possible, I'm sure most doctors, most providers would want to do that. The problem is that, we're told that there's only one way to do it. You have to cut it out. You have to poison it. You have to burn it. And I really do think that if we start to show through research and through true anecdotal stories and case studies of recovery, and talk about it more like we're doing now, and like what's possible, not only is the provider going to want to do that, but the patient is going to have more confidence and less fear going into their treatment. And they can start to go into it with optimism instead of going into it with just like, well, if you don't do radiation and chemo, like you have a 10% survival rate, or, if you go through it, you have a 60% survival rate. And like all that does is just put fear in their minds. And then that doesn't even, include the fact that if you look past 5 years of after those treatments, you start to see that, longevity and getting into a thriving state is greatly diminished. And even survivability after that is greatly diminished. And so there's just a lot of things here that need to be addressed. And I think, there's never a one size fits all for anyone or any provider, but there is a way to collaborate more effectively. And that's why I'm glad that we're all here today.
Thank you so much. First of all, just to share with people, it's highly unusual. In my medical training, right up until 2020, we didn't involve naturopathic doctors or functional doctors. It was invisible. It wasn't even as though it was diminished. It was invisible, which is why I think it's really important to broaden the conversation to include people who have very different training than pure medical doctors. At the same time, I do think that medical doctors have a lot to add to the knowledge base and move the needle in terms of what is possible. And I'm so pleased that Dr. Paul Marik can be with us tonight. Paul, or Dr. Marik, you had quite the last several years, like I did. And you were you were a strong academic physician. I made my career in the community, not really in academic centers, but you were really an academic physician. And you discovered really firsthand that if you have intellectual independence, the system really doesn't tolerate that. And I'm just kind of curious about your perspective and experience with that.
Yeah, you're right. So I think COVID opened up our eyes. Up until COVID, we believed the narrative. We believed what the medical schools taught us. We believed what was published in the journals. Not really realizing that the whole system was hijacked, really, by the pharmaceutical industry, by big industry. But with COVID, the door opened, and we realized how we were being misled. So I think it opened up our eyes to the reality of what was actually happening.
So what's interesting for me, we come, right? So I was an ER doctor, you're critical care. So for me, from my perspective in the ER, talking specifically about cancer, patients, it took me a long time to put this together. Patients would come into the ER, let's say with end stage cancer. As an ER doctor, I was really meeting them for the first time at this very extreme moment. And they would come in, or the family would come in with them, and they would tell me that they're in the middle of some chemotherapy. And so as an ER doctor, I assumed that they were in the middle of a potentially curative process. So I'm sharing my ignorance with the audience. So I took the approach, I should do everything, and I should, full court press, and they're obviously in some kind of curative situation. And it took me probably 10 years as a physician to realize that our oncologists were really giving people this very harsh treatment right up until, honestly, the point of death. And I'm only speaking from my position as an emergency physician, but I routinely would see very end stage cachectic patients that if I had seen this on the street, or I'd seen this, in my own family's situation, my own family's life, I would have immediately recognized that this is an incurable situation. And why are the patients on these massive, chemotherapy protocols? And I'm sharing that with you because I'm sharing, I think, the blindness that a physician could have just being part of the system. It didn't occur to me for about 10 years that perhaps the oncologists were really doing the wrong thing, or et cetera. And I just wanted to say that to you because it was very disorienting, I think, as an ER physician, when I was seeing what looked very end stage. At the same time, the doctors were acting as though it wasn't. And I don't know, when I look back on that now, Dr. Marik, I think it was very, very dishonest.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the whole chemotherapy approach to the treatment of cancer is completely misleading. And I mean, for multiple reasons. So, firstly, the theory on which chemotherapy is based, the somatic mutation theory, is likely incorrect. So it's not due to mutations and chromosomal disease. And so chemotherapy, if you actually, maybe 6 to 7% of cancers are actually cured by chemotherapy, testicular cancer, choriocarcinoma, lymphoma, some leukemias. But the vast majority of cancers, chemotherapy really is palliative. It doesn't really have a major effect in curing the disease or prolonging life, and has enormous costs and enormous toxicity. And it's part of the system. And so there are other ways one can approach patients with cancer.
Right. And we're definitely going to get into it. And I just wanted to start that starting point that I do think that if you're a doctor in the middle of the system and you're raised to think a certain thing and just grew up that way in that culture, in that system, it took so long for me to even recognize something that would have been obvious to anybody, on the street, that, why are you giving poison to this person who's, has, 80 pounds and they can't eat and they're cachectic. And then they, honestly, some of these patients would die 3 days later. And this is how I began to understand that the oncology field was dishonest. And I'm sorry I'm not trying to slander an entire discipline, an entire specialty. There's always good people in it, but the whole discipline, the whole approach struck me as an ER physician to be kind of backwards. So I'd like to just introduce for the audience, Dr. Marik, because you'd be the best person to explain it. The whole concept of, chemotherapy. So how does a person first find out they have cancer, right? Usually like a doctor will see something on an x-ray, they'll see a mass or whatever. And that's what we always think of as cancer. But that's really like the tumor cells. But then there's also the concept, right, of the stem cell, the cancer stem cell. If you could just talk for a couple of minutes so that people can understand why you're saying chemotherapy is not really curative most of the time, right? It has to do with the fact that there's tumor cells and stem cells.
Well, firstly, one needs an intact immune system, T cells, natural killer cells to kill the cancer. And so, unfortunately, what chemotherapy does is it destroys the very cells you need to kill the cancer. So, it causes severe bone marrow depression. It basically wipes out most of the immune system which need to fight the tumor. And then paradoxically, the cancer stem cell, which is the cells which give rise to the tumor, which proliferate, which are multipotent cells, are actually activated or by chemotherapy. So the cells which actually give rise to the tumor, to the cancer, are actually not destroyed by chemotherapy, and in some cases actually activated. So it seems somewhat paradoxical that chemotherapy kills the cells which are needed to destroy the tumor, but yet leave many of the cancer stem cells untouched.
Dr. Lake, were you familiar with this concept? And I'm just wondering how widely known it is amongst people, this concept that there's the tumor cells, but then there's the stem cells. And we'll talk about this more as the evening goes on. But the fact is that the tumor cells, let me start with the opposite. The stem cells are like the root of the tumor, right? They can grow and they're pluripotential. They can become many things. It's kind of the stem or the root. And then the tumor cells is like the branches or the leaves, right? So that's more visible. That's maybe what shrinks during chemotherapy. But the stem cells are the ones that can then go out. They can go quiet. They can go dark, but then they come back. And so when people have metastasis, it's often because those stem cells are still proliferating. Is that a concept that's even known, out there in the world? What's your opinion?
Not as far as I know. I never hear people asking those specific kind of questions, or even having those kind of concerns. So I think, again, most people, we're all trained to default to the expert. And if the expert is an oncologist that was trained in a particular way, then they're going to respect that opinion and they're going to go with it. Right. And so I think for most people now, you guys all mentioned COVID and post-COVID kind of enlightenment, I guess you could call it. Like, I think there's more of an awareness to these kind of things where we feel more willing to challenge and feel okay with it. To where I think previously it was like, anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorists kind of like slander talk about anyone that would challenge these ideas. But there's obviously been a lot of alternative healthcare practitioners that have been willing to kind of go against the grain and look into these things and have asked these questions. And from my experience, it's because they had their own health issues that required them to do so. And so they kind of had to look into it and they had enough knowledge to understand it. But for most people, no, they don't understand it.
That's my impression as well. So we're going to go to Drew, but when we come back, we're going for just a minute. We're going to talk about some specific things that should be considered either alongside or instead of traditional cancer options. Drew, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gold. You know, listening to Dr. Marik and Dr. Lake talk, it reminds me again, exactly one of the most powerful tools inside the toolbox at GoldCare is that we have taken the allopathic side of care and the naturopathic side of care, and we've brought them together. So we can work with traditionally trained doctors. We do work with traditionally trained doctors. And then we have an amazing naturopathic side of our business that allows us to collaborate and work together. And again, it's just some of the magic that GoldCare really does bring together. So don't forget to retweet this live stream, click the link in the title of tonight's webinar, and you can learn all about GoldCare. Back to you, Dr. Gold.
Thank you. So Dr. Marik, the other day, a few days ago, you had done a grand rounds for GoldCare, and you had said, I think 74% of oncologists, if they face, cancer diagnosis themselves, would really not go the conventional route. So that's a really shocking data point for people. I don't know if you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, if you have a look in the last 15, 20 years, the outcome of chemotherapy, the success is really pretty poor. At best, what it does is it prolongs life. I think it's been shown average 3.4 months. So chemotherapy, there are some tumors for which it actually is curative, but for the majority of cancers, basically what it does is it increases morbidity, it increases toxicity, it interferes with the quality of life. And what it gains is a few months extends life a few months, and at best. And so oncologists see this, they're not blind to what's going on. So the survey was, would oncologists, if they had a cancer, would they be willing to undergo chemotherapy? And surprisingly, 74% said no, they wouldn't, because they know that the effect on quality of life and has a minimal effect in terms of prolonging life.
I have to say that when I heard, I learned that from you. And when I heard that, I just found that incredible. So there you go. So then the question is, what do you do? Because people come down with these diagnoses, and we are not absolutely not saying that things are hopeless, not at all. We're saying that perhaps consider something else, expand your questioning and expand your answering. And one of the things that we do at GoldCare, which I know is, I'm not sure about Dr. Marik, I don't know this about you, but I know that Dr. Lake shares this, is we have a very strong kind of faith basis here. We value the academic and the intellectual and the scientific for sure, but we know that we are both mind, body, soul, spirit. All of that goes into play, especially when you get sick. You need that. And so I was thinking, and I went back and I started wondering about this. When there are, what are the options? So if you're going to reconsider chemotherapy and radiation therapy and all that stuff, I went back and, you look at the Bible and you look at our religious history, right? And one of the things that we've always done throughout history, we've lost touch with, is fasting. Now, that's kind of a curious thing, that's really a part of virtually every religion. The Jewish faith, the Christian faith, the Muslim faith, they all have lots of fast days. And that's really kind of curious. And I'm saying that now because one of the things that seems to be helpful in terms of a cancer diagnosis is fasting. It could be, full fast. It could be intermittent fasting. It could be kind of a short time, 3 or 4 days. It could be, 1 day, whatever. But I found that super interesting, both that there's that long religious history of intermittent fasting that we've had for all of human history, I suppose. And then, of course, looking for options when you get a new cancer diagnosis. So, Dr. Lake, I'm just very curious to hear what you might think about this.
Yeah, I think obviously God as our creator has wisdom of things that we didn't have until recently. Like he's had this awareness of how the body works for a while. And so sure, there are spiritual disciplines, benefits for doing fasting, but we are just now, I mean, even in the last 20, 15 years, been understanding the full benefit of how, intermittent fasting on a 12 to 14, maybe 16-hour basis is great for autophagy, which is that cellular cleanup. We know that getting into prolonged fasting for, maybe 24 hours to several days can provide a true kind of metabolic cellular reset. Like it literally starts to reprogram how your cells can function in a positive light. And so I think the interesting thing to think about for the viewer, if you're not in the medical field, is just it can make sense to you if you ask yourself this question of, well, what does consistent food intake do? Well, it requires energy. And if you're intaking things that are not feeding your cells and producing energy via your mitochondria, and you're actually intaking things like, products that are genetically modified, or they're sprayed with glyphosate, they're demineralized, full of other toxins, they're hybridized wheat, they're full of sugar, starches, and all of a sudden you're robbing your body's ability to clean up and get rid of damaged cells and DNA, but also you're not able to produce enough energy. And I think a lot of people that have diabetes, you understand this very well. When you get hypoglycemic or you have a low blood sugar moment, you have to kind of constantly feed yourself. And that's a cellular dysfunctional state that you get in. And I think cancer plays a huge role in this at the end of that road.
So I went about this, I think, a little bit backwards, because I kind of leapt into the fasting, but I just found it so interesting. And I was looking at different things that one does if one is kind of, broadening the scope of what one thinks about when you are coming down with, you've been told you have cancer. So Dr. Marik, I know that many of us believe that cancer really is essentially a metabolic disorder more than anything. And that's what led me to jump into the fasting. But it'd be great if you could educate the audience a bit on what that means as a more of a metabolic disorder, right? Because you started off this evening by saying maybe we're on the complete wrong path of how we're thinking about cancer. And, I agree with you that it is a metabolic disorder.
Yeah, so the conventional theory is that it's a genetic disease. It's due to genetic mutations. But there's more and more evidence that actually it's a metabolic disease, that the cell undergoes metabolic reprogramming. And their metabolic reprogramming is the basic primary abnormality in the cell, and the genetic mutations occur secondarily. And this is known as the Warburg effect, that the cancer cell is highly dependent on glucose. And instead of glucose being used by the mitochondria in oxidative phosphorylation, as normally happens, it actually undergoes glycolysis. So the mitochondria are defective, they are dysfunctional, and that glucose is not used appropriately like it normally is, and undergoes glycolysis. And this is so there's metabolic reprogramming. So the way you can then target the cancer cell is, instead of going for the nucleus and the chromosomal abnormalities, is you use drugs and nutraceuticals which target the metabolic reprogramming and therefore interfere with cell division. And part of that is actually diet. Is you need to, you spoke about fasting. And so, there are some people who've managed, to cure the cancer just by dietary manipulation alone, by fasting and by limiting glucose and carbohydrates in the diet, have been actually able to cure the cancer. So, we talk about metabolic management. The first thing really is a low glycemic diet, to restricting, the intake of carbohydrates in a carbohydrate-rich diet. And then also, intermittent fasting and periodic fasting to actually starve the cancer of metabolites it needs to survive.
Honestly, this is, something you've known for a long time, Dr. Marik, and maybe Dr. Lake as well, but this is really shocking stuff for most people who are listening. It's absolutely shocking stuff to talk about, changing your diet aggressively. I'm not saying any of this is easy, But, having cancer and chemotherapy sure isn't easy either. So this is just really shocking stuff to hear. So I'm going to say it again for people. How you manage your diet, if you have been told that you have cancer or kind of in that world and you're seeing different specialists, is unbelievably important. And we want to work with you on that because it's something that you can control. And honestly, Dr. Marik, this reminds me of like during the COVID years when we doctors did not tell patients that if they control their glucose, they got SARS-2, very, very important to control their glucose. That really was linked to doing worse with COVID. Same thing with vitamin D. And it's very frustrating. So we're seeing this again and again and again with different diseases. So we just want to shout this loud and say to people that there are things that you can do that are within your control that don't make any industries big money, but they need to be looked into. And a big one of those is diet. And I do find it fascinating that all religious faiths or most religious faiths had fasting as part of, what they recommended for humans. I just think that's amazing.
So Dr. Gold,
Yeah.
one of the things which is really fascinating is patients will ask their oncologist, so, what can I eat or what shouldn't I eat? And almost universally, the oncologist will say, it doesn't matter what you eat.
Yeah.
You can eat chocolates, you can eat cake, you can eat ice cream. Diet has no impact or no effect on your cancer. And obviously that's completely, absolutely incorrect. Even their own literature shows that, for example, patients with colorectal cancer who've had surgery, that those who have high glucose and high insulin levels have a much higher risk of recurrent disease. I mean, it's, published in peer-reviewed literature. So we know that diet makes an enormous difference. And so, as I said, the cell has been reprogrammed to use glucose. And so by manipulating the diet, by decreasing glucose, by going on episode, having episodic starvation, you're depriving the cancer cell of the fuel it needs to grow, and it undergoes what's called, cell death or apoptosis. So diet is a very, very effective way of controlling the cancer. So even if patients are getting chemotherapy, there's good data that if you combine dietary changes while you're having chemotherapy, it makes the chemotherapy much more effective in killing the cancer. So, it's not a one or either or phenomena. You can do both. There's no reason that you can't combine adjunctive therapy in patients undergoing chemotherapy. It makes it much more effective.
Actually, exactly. I'm really glad you said that. So often, because I think I sounded as though I'm throwing chemotherapy out. I don't really mean to sound like that. Chemotherapy can be very helpful to shrink the size of the tumor. But does it get to the heart of the matter? Is it going to get rid of the stem cells that can then proliferate, can go quiet and then be proliferative? Yes. And in fact, fasting before chemotherapy has been shown to be helpful. And the point is that there's a lot more that you can do than maybe even the doctors are telling you. And there's things you can do that are within your own control. So Dr. Lake, do you have any thoughts on this about, your own personal situation that you went with your brother and then is in your career as you moved on, but this whole concept of nutrition and cancer diagnoses?
Yeah, it's the primary thing that we do. It's the first place that we start. It's the last place we want to focus on when we're done with the protocol is getting them back to a place of balanced nutrition and identifying just how, when you start to feel better from eating non-inflammatory foods on a consistent basis, maybe, if you do it for a few days, you may not notice a whole lot. You might, but if you do it for a few weeks, a few months, you truly see transformation. Then you combine that with getting at the root of why you'd be metabolically unhealthy with, poor circadian rhythm, excess inflammation, how that triggers less insulin sensitivity and how that then further worsens the mitochondrial damage. Like you start to feel energized, you start to have more mental clarity. And for people that have, a active cancer diagnosis, there's no doubt it's going to benefit you. And again, I work with people before they get to that point. Like I because of the lane that I'm in, it's hard for me to work with clients that are actually undergoing chemotherapy. And but I would be more than happy to do that with people. But I know it's just whole like fear that it creates even with providers like ourselves, to where, in the past, I've been very fearful of saying anything about cancer. I've got banned on TikTok for talking about cancer. And it's like the deadliest word you can kind of mention, even worse than COVID sometimes, because it's such a huge money-making business. But the reality is, when you start to see that you can empower people and they can do it themselves by using food and using detox methods and protocols and basic supplements and circadian rhythm, and they start to heal, it really is revolutionary. And I want as many people to know as possible that it is possible to heal.
Amazing. That's true. I wasn't even thinking about the censorship angle when it comes to cancer. You're right. It's a very big industry.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to Drew. And then after that, what I want to talk about, the next big topic is the other things we can do. Diet and fasting is one big whole category, but there's also natural options and some therapeutic options, repurposed medications that are also very helpful in this lane. So Drew, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gold. You're absolutely right. Both Dr. Marik, Dr. Lake, and even Dr. Gold, the things you said about fear and how it initiates everyday Americans to just make a decision in a very traditional sense, and that there are other options out there, and places like GoldCare can show you how to do those other things. There are many things that can be done. We have an amazing complementary cancer care team at GoldCare, and we can answer all of these types of questions. If you come on over and check us out, we'd love to help you guys out. So Dr. Gold, back to you.
So if there's one thing that I've learned over the last few years that is very different than when I was practicing medicine actively in the ER, it's about cancer, is that it's very important to reduce the hospitableness, the easy environment that cancer cells might have, right? We want to make that terrain where cancer goes a lot less hospitable. So fasting is one of those things that does that. It creates just a more hostile metabolic terrain for the cancer cells to grow. Periodic fasting, right? If you do, a fast for 24 hours or 48 hours, or some people can do longer, is helpful. Also, just in general, intermittent fasting seems to have a lot of health benefits really across the board. I'm not sure I can think of any reason why all people shouldn't be essentially intermittent fasting, which is essentially a period of time in which you don't eat. So 16-8, for example, is a shorthand way to understand intermittent fasting. That would be where you go 16 hours not eating, 8 hours where you could eat. So intermittent fasting is one of those. And then also, when you do things like that, when you modify the food intake, the mechanism of action is that you're providing less glucose, like Dr. Marik said, also more autophagy, more breakdown of the bad cells, less inflammatory cytokines, and you're really increasing your immune cells to become more effective. But in addition to that, there really are a lot of medications, some over the counter and some prescription, that can be repurposed and seem to have a lot of promise in cancer diagnoses. And quite frankly, this isn't talked about nearly enough. And that's something that Dr. Marik knows very, very well. And I'd love you to talk for several minutes, Dr. Marik, on repurposed medications, again, whether it's over the counter, whether it's prescription, just what your thoughts are on these things, just any recommendations you might have in general, not specific medical advice, but just the world of repurposed medicines for cancer.
Yeah, so surprisingly, there are over 200 repurposed drugs that have been shown to have pretty potent activity against cancer cells. There are probably about 2,000 nutraceuticals that have been shown to have very potent activity against cancer cells. And, so it's really interesting. I mean, if you look at the drug ivermectin, which I'll mention because, it came to the fore during COVID, and, it was considered a horse deworming medicine, which turned out to be very effective for the treatment of COVID. So ivermectin is a product of nature. So it wasn't synthesized. I mean, its origin is in nature. It came out of is produced by a streptomyces, which is a bacterium. It wasn't, conceived in a laboratory. This is, one of the gift of nature. And basically, ivermectin is one of the most effective drugs for the treatment of cancer. It's a very effective cancer drug, and it acts via multiple mechanisms to kill the cancer cell, and it acts on the terrain that you spoke about to improve the tumor microenvironment, makes it less hospitable, and improves the immune system. So it activates many of the body's immune mechanisms to kill the cancer cell. So, one of them is ivermectin, but it's a very effective cancer drug. And obviously, it's cheap. The other thing about ivermectin is it's safe. It's remarkably safe. You consider the toxicity of chemotherapy drugs, which is awful. Whereas ivermectin, billions of doses have been dispensed across the world. It's one of the safest medications there is. So here you have a drug which is, it's a product of nature, has all of these applications. It's very effective against almost all types of cancers because it targets the metabolic reprogramming. And it has a very favorable side effect profile in that it has minimal side effects. So, it's almost like it's a wonder drug for the treatment of cancer. And so the other thing to remember is we never use just one drug alone. It's dietary manipulation is always first. It's diet and fasting. And then together we add, a combination of repurposed drugs and nutraceuticals, which act in synergy to kill the cancer cell and strengthen the immune system, which helps get rid of the cancer. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and it seems to be very effective.
I love it. So, and Dr. Lake, before we turn to you, because I'm going to ask you to talk about some of the non-prescription things that are out there, because there's quite a lot. But just quickly, Dr. Marik, I mean, there are others, right? There's mebendazole, there's even cimetidine, propranolol. Just like you said, there's a couple hundred that have some utility. I think that's fascinating. Just, you don't have to mention all of them, but I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, the ones that we like are, first of all, green tea extract, EGCG, is highly effective against cancer cells. And it's green tea. It's very effective in preventing cancer. The second is turmeric or curcumin, acts via multiple pathways to kill the cancer cell. Metformin, which is an anti-diabetic medication, which is exceedingly cheap, exceedingly safe, has anti-cancer activity.
Right.
There are, there's an enormously long list of medications that we use together in combination, like a concert, to kill the cancer cell. And these are all repurposed drugs. They're very safe. They're very cheap. And, when used together, very effective.
Dr. Lake, is this something that people know when they come to see you, or is this something you educate them on? And, again, like berberine and curcumin, as Dr. Marik just mentioned, green tea, I've heard melatonin, what's your professional practice? How do you work with these supplements, medications, et cetera?
Yeah, again, I would say a lot of my clients are very educated, but they're not necessarily either putting it into practice or doing like all of it at once. Like they're kind of doing a little bit here, a little bit there, but they're maybe not following specific protocols to, be as effective as ivermectin when it comes to deworming, right? Like they may do like some oregano here and there, or some wormwood or things like that, but they're not following a protocol of detoxification, right? Like they're not opening detox pathways and not going through a full, phase of detoxification of parasites and heavy metals and molds. Like they're kind of doing a little bit here and there, and then they maybe not combining it with their diet and their sleep. And so there's like always like a bit of these components. We're trying to bring it all together for people. But yeah, as Dr. Marik said, ivermectin was shown to be quite effective. And, as an antiparasitic, I think people were wondering like, well, what's the cancer connection with the COVID connection? Like, why is it effective for both these things? And in my understanding, it's because it gets back to this oxidative phosphorylation issue that we were talking about with your mitochondria. When you have parasites that are utilizing or blocking, this pathway that would help your mitochondria to function well, same as with, heavy metals or EMF radiation or, a lot of chronic stress can all do the same thing. It all impairs, your mitochondria. And so it impairs your cellular function. But when you look at how parasites function and when they start to dysregulate your immune system modulation, they start to turn on these Th1 cells, which are responsible for more pathogenic activity and kind of cleaning that up, which is where you would kind of put the COVID conversation of, like a virus. And then you have the idea of, well, parasites also utilize a bunch of energy and block this oxidative phosphorylation pathway with mitochondria. You start to see how cancer can be affected with an antiparasitic and be beneficial, and same with COVID and viruses and autoimmunity and all these different issues. So I think people start to wonder, like, well, we're in the United States, conventional doctors are told, parasites aren't really a big issue. This isn't a third world country. Like, we don't need to really worry about that. But if you look at it, a lot of people, most of the population has some forms of parasitic activity in combination with all these other factors that we've been talking about of poor health, metabolic dysfunction, and so on. And so it becomes a piece of the pie, but it's maybe not the whole pie, but it definitely is a piece of it for some people.
This is amazing stuff. I just want to say that it's very difficult for doctors who, are licensed by various state governments to even have these conversations. We saw during the COVID years that doctors who talked honestly and frankly specifically got punished. Many people know that I did, Dr. Marik did, Dr. Corey did, Dr. McCullough did, lots and lots of us, Dr. Mary Talibat Bowden did. Many of doctors were faced a lot of difficulty from their state medical boards, their licensing boards, certainly their specialty boards. And because of that, it's actually really, really difficult to have honest conversations with licensed physicians. I mean, I'm just going to say it like that. That is a fact. It's because the doctor's own livelihood is at risk if they say things like this. And I'm not exaggerating in the least. The state of California, they had passed a law. We kind of colloquially called it the no second opinion law. It actually eventually faded out into oblivion just because it was so unconstitutional. But essentially it said that if you disagreed with what the government narrative said, in that case it was about COVID, then you could lose your medical license. But in other words, these things are real. The fact that doctors don't talk to you honestly, they may not know the facts, they may not know the truth. They may be like I was in the ER all those years, not really recognizing what was right in front of me. But even if they wanted to see the truth, there actually is a very high price to pay for doctors who tell you the truth. It's one of the reasons we actually built GoldCare, was to be able to have frank conversations with people. Everyone who works with GoldCare and everyone who comes, and thank you both for being guests at GoldCare, it's because we really just want to get the information out to the people. And the other piece that we do at GoldCare is we put you in touch with providers, honest, ethical, independent providers, basically who believe in the doctor-patient relationship and who practice independent of other incentives. Their only incentive really is to do the best thing for the patient. That's why we have medical doctors and naturopathic doctors. And we are cognizant that most people can't really find doctors who are willing to say things that threaten their own livelihood. Dr. Marik, I was thinking of you, really when I was saying that, because you paid a high price for telling the truth. And I don't know if you wanted to say a word or two or not about, it's very difficult for doctors to just speak honestly.
Yeah. So, you're right. So, when it came to COVID in particular, if you didn't follow the narrative and you went against mainstream medicine, there were serious consequences. And we know, and this is not an exaggeration, that all of the interventions and all the recommendations in COVID that the healthcare establishment suggested were wrong. They were false. They were incorrect across the board. And so if you questioned the narrative, you face serious consequences. So I basically lost my hospital privileges. I lost my license. I lost my job. And the American Board of Internal Medicine revoked our privileges and for telling the truth, basically. So we know that the whole thing of masks was incorrect. The 6-foot thing was incorrect. The social isolation was incorrect. We knew that this was a man-made virus. We knew that. And the whole vaccine thing being not safe and being not effective. So, but if you stood up for the truth and you spoke the truth, there were serious consequences. And, the COVID really brought that out.
Yeah.
Right. And it bears repeating because, yes, it was most severe during COVID. But as Dr. Lake said, when you mention cancer, you're concerned that you're going to be censored on social media. And that is really how people get the information these days, is through social media. And it is a very powerful industry. So it is the worst during COVID, but I do think it has kept people silent on things like this, because it's the same sort of situation where the things that can actually help a patient don't have any kind of profit motive for the system in general. So
you're absolutely correct. Most of the paradigm of most modern healthcare is false. You look at the use of statins, the treatment of diabetes, the treatment of metabolic syndrome, the treatment of cancer. All of these major medical problems are based on fraudulent and false approach. And that if you advocate a more rational, holistic approach, severely frowned upon by the medical community. And obviously, the social media will ban you or, restrict what you do.
So what we do for people is we give you fearless, truth-telling doctors. That's quite frankly what we do. And we have lots of them who actually have deep content knowledge on cancer in particular. And you can see our advisors who are unafraid to tell you truthful information. We have several, Dr. Murphy, Dr. Ling, Mr. Jones, Ms. Bodula, sorry. And these are people who will just meet with you and prioritize the doctor-patient relationship and tell you truthful information. And we invite everybody who's interested, everybody who's worried for themselves or for a family member, or just wants to maximize their own health so that this isn't a concern of theirs, right? Because what we're saying is it's a metabolic disorder, right? So that's something that develops over years, and that's something that you should look at early rather than later, and be educated now so that you make a less hospitable terrain inside of your body for cancer to develop. So we invite you to come and see our amazing doctors. And Dr. Lake, I'd love to have you, kind of have some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think the big thing to remind yourselves is just that, your body is designed to heal. There's plenty of evidence of that. And this isn't, part of this title was, faith over fear or whatever. And I think it's such a good title because whenever you go to the doctor, like, again, they're always telling you the bad news. And I think you have to be surrounding yourself with people like that are part of GoldCare or in your own community, to where it's like they're sharing their positive stories of true healing, and they're walking the walk with you. And you're joining in a community that does that, because that's really what healing is going to require. But you have to start with your own belief that it's even possible. Because if you're going in this treatment, if you're going in your life thinking that you're just destined for death at an early age, and cancer's out to get you, and all these things are out to get you, government's out to get you, you're doom scrolling all the time. Like, you have to start to slow it down and get simplified with this stuff. And, the sunlight is healing. Vitamin D is healing. Eating nutrient dense foods that have B vitamins that help you detoxify and help to supply your cells with magnesium and help your body to thrive. Like, these things are not overly complicated, but we are so addicted to like quick fixes and dopamine hits and all these like doom scrolling mentalities. And we have to get away from that and get simplified with this. And I think the people that heal the fastest and most effectively are taking it pretty simplistically. and doing the things that matter most, which is surrounding yourself with good people, with good food, good sunlight, good rhythms, and like that's in good water, good air, as much as you can find it. And those things are very healing to your soul and your tissues.
I love it. That's such an optimistic ending. I love it. And we actually are optimistic. It was kind of a serious talk tonight, but I'm actually very optimistic, with truth coming out and finding out all these things that a person can do that are within their power, within their control. And there's more truth-telling doctors out there than maybe you realized. Dr. Marik, you are a fierce truth teller for sure. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with really thousands of people tonight. Dr. Lake, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope to have you both back. And Drew, back to you.
Thank you guys so much. Dr. Lake, Dr. Marik, Dr. Gold, amazing job, amazing conversation. Tonight really got me thinking about miracles. Anytime we hear someone has been recently diagnosed with cancer, we pray for all kinds of miracles. This also reminds me that miracles don't always look the way we expect. Sometimes they're quiet, an unanswered prayer, a moment of peace, a spark of courage to try something different. But what we've also heard reminds me that God is still at work, healing, restoring, renewing what the world says is beyond repair. He is still calling people to live in truth, and he's still using ordinary men and women to do extraordinary things. I want to remind you, God's timing is perfect. The waiting season may test you, but it also transforms you. When fear tells you it's over, faith whispers, just wait. God's not done. So hold fast, stay faithful, and trust that the same God who made your body to heal is still in the business of miracles. Don't forget to click the link in the title of tonight's webinar to learn more about GoldCare and join us today to get your first appointment with our nursing team on us. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we'll see you at the next GoldCare Medical Town Hall on December 9th. Good night.
Do you feel like the healthcare system is failing you? That's because it is, working exactly as intended to prioritize profits, bureaucracy, and big pharma, while leaving you and your family vulnerable when you need care the most. We understand your frustration. You've been asked to trust a system that feels rushed, impersonal, and biased. You deserve better. That's why we created GoldCare. Here, your values matter, your choices matter, and most importantly, you matter. GoldCare is more than a solution. It's a revolution. Trusted by over 10,000 members nationwide, we've built a system that puts your wellness first. With ethical, independent doctors who work for you, not the system, you'll have access to care that's transparent, trustworthy, and aligned with your values. We understand that stepping away from the familiar can feel daunting, but staying in a system that doesn't truly serve you is even harder. That's why GoldCare offers a healthcare alternative designed to work for you. Whether you're ready to step away from the system entirely or prefer to keep your insurance while seeking the transparent care, ethical doctors, and education you deserve, it's time to stop trusting a system that's failed you. Take control of your health with GoldCare. Join today for just $10 a month and become part of the healthcare revolution. GoldCare, built for you, powered by freedom, trusted by thousands.